Revelation 18. Make a thought-provoking statement right from the bat, or right off the bat. Apathy and ignorance plague our culture. It's a I don't know and I don't really care attitude. Maybe translated to, what's all that got to do with me? As if the only concerns we have are what affect our bank account or our social status or the joy of my life for the next 24 hours or whatever it is. We've all seen this. The me attitude has overwhelmed us. They say overwhelmed our culture and us. And I don't think we get to claim exemption. We fall into the trap at times too. We see it when we drive down the interstate. That one guy, he gets that lane and everybody else gets the other lane. Don't be that guy. Whether you go into a drive-up window or seen an election play out or many other things we see over and over. I was at the doctor a while back and the waiting room's completely full. Of course, you only got a few chairs because they're 6 feet apart. And the waiting room's all full, and somebody came in on a walker, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I jumped up. It's like, take my seat. See the looks that people give you, like, why would you do that? I'm like, why didn't the rest of you jump up? I wanted to say something, because it was like several younger people, But if you just keep your head down and keep that facing that phone, you can just ignore what's going on around you. I'm thinking to those other 6, 8 younger people that had good strong legs and back, why didn't you jump up and offer your seat to that person? Well, I knew the answer. I wasn't making myself out to be any hero, because way too many times I've had my nose stuck in a phone or book or off wandering somewhere and missed that opportunity. We shouldn't miss those. Bread and circuses is a phrase coined by a man named Juvenal. He was a political satirist in ancient Rome. Around the time, maybe just a little slightly later than John's time, when John was writing this, but it's very close. And he used it to criticize the selfishness of the common people and their neglect of the bigger concerns of the culture. He implied people were ignorant of the priority of their civic duty. That bread and circuses were all they were interested in. Bread and circus was the interest of the people. It's all they cared about every day. And they no longer cared about their sort of the history, the historical birthright, the political involvement, the heritage of the culture around them, the heritage of the nation, of maybe their family. And he argued that they were driven by just those few things. And when you look at those few things, it is consistent with the idea of the rich young ruler. Is everybody really just wanted to be rich, wealthy, have plenty, with a healthy desire for much more? They want to think about death. They want to be forever young, and they want to rule their life. Everybody wanted to be that rich young ruler, concerned with only themselves. And those in power wanted to be very much the same. They had a lust for power. They had a desire to grow old and stay, alive and not ever, age to the point where they had to think about death. They wanted to be rich and richer, and they wanted to be, as I said, the ruler. Rome introduced in these days the grain dole. And the grain dole was giving away free food, cheap food, It was the government doling this out, this grain dole, and it was simply to keep the votes of the poorer citizens. And then it gave them the entertainment. They gave them, this was the idea of the bread and the circus, that the government would provide cheap food or free food. They would provide entertainment. Thereby, they would generate public approval. That the public would think the Roman government was awesome, that they did this. And not that they were awesome because of their excellence in public service or the excellence in their policies, but simply by diversion, distraction, satisfying the base needs and desires. And you read all this about Rome and you go, wow, that's kind of sounds familiar. We see in our day, as John was writing about Babylon, and he was looking at Rome, he was writing about Babylon, this system behind the scenes that was always there and always trying to rise up in prominence. It's the sinful heart of man that always wants to build that tower to make a name for ourselves, a culture that wants to gather together apart from God and seek fame and glory, make a name apart from God. As we see Christianity on the decline in our days, we see the rise of sort of this Roman Empire, this rise of this Babylon in the backdrop of our culture today. Not just America, not just, that's what we tend to look more at and what we tend to see, but it's really worldwide. Seems as though people are being purchased by bread and circuses, with a total disregard to national heritage, with any thought to the future whatsoever. The focus is on the here and the now and the me. And really, who is responsible for my joy in the next few moments, few hours, or few weeks? And of course, there's an obvious agenda that's going out, and many times that's made to be a political agenda, and I think the political agenda is obviously present, but I think you're thinking too small. I think there's a greater agenda in the backdrop, and it's very satanic agenda to draw mankind away from the blessings of God and the heritage that God has provided for the nations. And in order to do so, you have to distract people. One is you got to distract the church. You've got to remove people's sense of a national, of being part of something great that's been blessed by God. You got to get that out of your thinking. You got the idea of a nationalism. You got to remove this idea of religion, of having a faith. Where your faith is what the rulers of the world will tell you. We're the ones you need to trust in. You don't need to be just trusting in your God and your old Bible is the word that they would use. Well, they wouldn't come right out and say it that way, but at least not yet. But it's coming. In chapter 18, the harlot, the great harlot of Babylon, begins to look a little bit different. Instead of a harlot riding the beast, ruling over and residing on these 7 hills, she is portrayed as a great port city. And this further enhances the picture of this sort of Babylon system. It's a world center of trade. It's the ivory towers of a world system, the courts of power and worldly authorities. It's the cathedrals of religion that are either empty or soon to be empty. In either way, they seem to be pretty much powerless. It's the halls and the lecture rooms of education that long ago gave up on educating and indoctrinating. The Babylon now looks like an idol in which many find hope for fame and riches and a way to make a name for me. Babylon exists to capture the hearts and minds of the religious and the spiritual masses, to tickle the ears, to offer a form of godliness that denies the power of Christ, denies the power of the resurrection. Babylon looks as if she lives in this abundance of luxury, which draws men to the beauty, to the luxury, to the amazing sort of desire for that wealth and that greed that rises up in us. When things are being given away, we want ours too. Everyone is drawn to her, even though evil has become good, and good is becoming evil. She's putting darkness for light, light for darkness, bitter for sweet, sweet for bitterness. One commentator called this lure of Babylon, this lure that would capture our eye. Wow. It's beautiful. The beautiful clothing and the money and the fame and so cool. Something down inside of us that draws us to that catches our eye, that we want more. The power and the money. Well, one commentator called it the Siren song of Babylon. You know what the Siren song is, right? The sirens, you look them up, the sirens were these mythical creatures, and they actually look like a chicken with a woman's head. It's pretty bizarre looking. But the sirens would be on the coast, supposedly, and they'd sing these beautiful songs in the dark of the night and in the fog, and they would lure the ship's captains. They would just be overwhelmed with this beautiful song, and they would turn their ships because they wanted to hear this beautiful siren song. They wanted to hear more. And they would just be captivated by this and drawn closer and closer until they wrecked their ships on the coast and into the cliffs and the rocks of the coast. And this is the picture of the siren song of Babylon. That Babylon is so beautiful, so amazing, so it speaks to that sinful nature in all of us. And that if we're not actively recognizing and fighting against it and warring against it, we'd be drawn away to that culture and drawn away in the midst of that until we shipwreck our faith on the coast of godlessness. We're at Revelation 18, verse 1. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. So after these things is sort of key that John is now seeing another vision. That is separate from the vision of Babylon previously. And so previously Babylon had this worldwide sort of undertow throughout the culture, but it always said it had this religious, that it was sort of born out of this religious view. And so we're looking at it from that point, and now we look at it from a completely different standpoint, this Babylon that looks like this city. And so this other angel comes down from heaven with great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And that is the illumination, the glory of this angel. It speaks to the authority and the power of God. This angel is coming forth with the word of God, bringing the power of God and illuminating the earth with this message. Verse 2. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons. And so this is actually quoting, this is language borrowed from Isaiah. Isaiah 21 almost exactly. If you want to write it in there, it's Isaiah 21:9. You could also see something very similar in Isaiah 13:19, Jeremiah 51. And so this whole language of the fall of Babylon is seen over and over again in the Old Testament. And so John is using a picture of the Babylon of the Old Testament to point toward the fall of this Babylon. And he's got his eyes and his mind on Rome for sure. The Babylon that is the backdrop of the existing Roman culture at that time, that looked very much like Babylon, that was persecuting the saints, that they were going through such difficult times. And so And part of this is that he's pointing forward to a time where what we call this revived Roman Empire, which is going to look very much like that, with Babylon as the backdrop in these end times, which we appear to be rapidly approaching. The verses in the Old Testament that speak of Babylon were the verses that were related to Israel going into 70 years of captivity. That over and over again, God kept speaking to Judah and kept saying, turn from your sins, trust in the Lord alone. And they were worshiping idols. They were, doing lots of religious activity, but their eyes weren't on God. And in the prophets, through the prophets, he spoke to them over and over again. And they began to say, I'm going to bring destruction on you from the north. I'm going to bring Babylon on you. And they just totally ignored it, thinking that we live in Jerusalem. God's not going to destroy Jerusalem. We have the temple. God's not going to destroy the temple. He would never do such a thing. Look how religious we are. We're God's people. We live in Jerusalem, have the temple. Nothing's ever going to happen. God said it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And it happened. The Babylonians came and it was ugly, and they threw down, destroyed Jerusalem, threw down every stone in the temple. They absolutely just wiped out, carried off all of the temple, the beautiful things of the temple, all the elements of the temple, the tools and so forth. And they carried them all off to Babylon in addition to carrying off many of those who weren't killed. And it appears that a large part of the Jews were wiped out, and then many went into captivity in Babylon. Daniel was one of these, right? Daniel, and we know about Daniel, and we know that Jeremiah was involved in that and spoke into those days and into those people's lives. And one of the prophecies was a prophecy to those people that were going into Babylon, that there's a day coming that this was their punishment, that God used Babylon, a godless nation, used them to come and do the work of God. But in time, that Babylon would also be judged. And so that they could know that the day was coming, that God would call them out of Babylon, and that he would say, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. There was a day coming when judgment was coming to Babylon, and they could have that assurance and know that when the punishment was through, that God was going to judge them. He said it would become a dwelling place for demons. You can imagine that Babylon was overrun with demons because of all the pagan gods. And every time Babylon conquered another nation, and they conquered many, they would just absorb their gods. They would carry their gods back and put them in sort of their, I guess, a showplace or museum. And basically what they were saying is, look at all the gods we've conquered. Our God is greater than all of these gods. And that's why they carried everything out of the temple from Jerusalem to carry it to Babylon and say, look, what our God has conquered is greater than the Israelite God. Except God wasn't done playing his hand. And so you can imagine all the demons that might have been displayed and represented in all the pagan gods and all the idols. And it was very much the same in the Roman culture, and what John was looking at, all that was going on throughout Rome, and many gods and goddesses and crazy stuff was being worshipped, and man, they just seemed to grasp onto anything and fall down before it and do whatever. And you just sort of do some cursory reading on these things, and it's just bizarre, some of the things that they bought into. And so it was a dwelling place of demons, that the idea of Babylon falling, that the only thing that would be fit, that the city would be fit for after it was fallen, would be a place for demons, a prison for demons, for every foul spirit. And again, this is language borrowed from the Old Testament, but John is applying it to Rome, to this Babylonian backdrop. and a cage for every unclean and hated bird, which many see as other classifications or sort of language to imply other demons of some sort. Verse 3, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Remember, fornication is that word porneia. That all the nations, they've drunk of the wine of this wrath. They have suffered by the plagues that she brought on because of their association, because of their link to her, that the nations are going to fall and be judged and suffer from this same wrath being linked to her porneia. And then the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And then the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And so we see three groups of people that are directly affected from this Babylon: the nations, the kings of the earth, and the merchants of the earth. The merchants of the earth have become just filthy rich, just jumping on board, using this mindset, this culture, this backdrop that draws men and women into it, almost as if they're under a spell. They're drawn into this Babylon sort of picture, and they're just taking advantage of it through marketing and just drawing people in and helping, just making lots of money, getting stinking rich off of this Babylon and what she has to offer. And so that is the picture. The word luxury there is fascinating because it's only used one time in the New Testament. And that's always just sort of one of those things, get a little circle in my Bible, that's the only place that word is used in the Scriptures. Abundance of her luxury. Verse 4, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins and lest you receive her plagues. And so here's that call, and this is very much like the Old Testament call to God's people to say, come out of her. There's a day coming when the call was going to be, come out of Babylon, my people. And until that day, the people were in Babylon. They were in the presence of Babylon. It's kind of what we talked about earlier, is that we live in a world that keeps continuing, making this hard left-hand turn farther and farther away from God. And we're in this world, and we find ourselves confused because if we are in the world, it feels like we're drawn farther. And if you're not engaged in holding fast, steadfast walk with the Lord in a serious way, embracing the Lord every day, taking that step closer to Him, the culture's going to draw you away. It's like that Siren song, drawing you off towards the cliffs. Because, man, that's just like humanistic ADD. Man, there's something shiny and we're drawn to it. And we get pulled away to it. And it's drawing you right to the cliffs. And the Lord's saying, come out of her. And that's that idea of coming out is a picture of the Exodus. And there's a verse that's very similar to that in Isaiah 48. It's very similar to that. And it is a picture of calling people out of Babylon, but Isaiah relates it to the Exodus. That you're in this bondage, you're in this place that's for a time, for a period. Remember, in the Exodus, it was when a family became a nation. And in this case, is it not when a group of people that are called out of the culture become the bride of Christ? Is that not what we're here for? Is that not what we're doing? It is that we become the bride of Christ, and we long for that day when He comes to take us home. And the day is going to come when He's going to say, come out of her, my people. We are to be separated from Babylon, not to share in her sins, not to receive her plagues. Verse 5. We're all the way to verse 5. For her sins have reached heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Remember what the whole Babylonian culture began as, right? Was the Tower of Babel. Was God said, go into the earth and disperse and rule it and populate it. And they said, nah, thank you. We think we're going to hang together and we're going to build a tower and we're going to make a name for ourselves and we're going to be like God. And he said that for her sins have reached the heaven. It's as if her sins were all stacked up. The sins of Babylon have stacked up until they reached the heaven, which is exactly what they were trying to do, making bricks and building a tower. Because they wanted to reach the heaven, make a name for themselves. They made a name for themselves. They became famous. That their sin has now stacked up and they've made a name for themselves as God now has his attention. And it's as if God remembered their iniquities, the iniquities of her sins. And so there's a call for 4 different things. First, render to her just as she rendered to you. Again, this is right out of the picture of Babylon's judgment in the Old Testament. That Babylon treated my people. God said, God used them to take his people captive, to bring judgment on them. But then God held them accountable for that judgment. He said, you treated my people poorly. And so he brings judgment on them, and he says, render to her just as she rendered to you. That cup of junk that she poured in you, you give it all back to her. All of that wrath that she brought on you, you bring it to her. Repay her double. There's the second one. Repay her double according to her works. That she not just deserves the same, but she gets a double of it. It's a cup of her own brew. And then it says to mix double for her. In the measure that she has glorified herself living luxuriously, in the same measure, give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen, and I am no widow, and I will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. And so there's 4 things that are called for, but they're not 4 things that are called for us to do. It's the 4 things that are called for, and it is 4 things that we can know that are going to be done. It is as good as done, the judgment against Babylon, that this will be rendered against her. She will be repaid, that she will be mixed this double portion. It will be given to her in a way that she will experience torment and sorrow, equivalent to the torment and sorrow that she caused all of God's people over all of the ages. How did she bring torment and sorrow? Well, we see she brought martyrdom, that she killed the prophets, she killed God's people. And we see that she shipwrecked the faith of many others, drawing them like a siren song to wreck their faith. But in her arrogance, she says, well, I sit as queen. I'm the widow, and I'm not going to see sorrow. And this is the lie. This is the biggest lie of Babylon to people. This is what draws them away to this left turn that looks, it's the shiny part of the culture that just draws us away. It's flashy, it's beautiful, it draws us something deep inside us. That sinful nature has a connection to those things. And it is the biggest lie that wealth and that prosperity is joy. That in that wealth and prosperity, you're somehow protected from judgment. That in that wealth and prosperity, if we all go there, that somehow God's not going to judge all of us. It's the belief that wide is that road that leads to destruction, but it'll all be okay if we all go there. As if God wouldn't judge something so beautiful something so wealthy, something so rich, something so desirable, something that would draw us all as humans in that way. And the other lie of Babylon is that God's not done anything yet. Tomorrow's going to be just like today. In fact, it could be better, right? It's going to be better because, as we said, we just need more taxes and more politicians and more government programs and more circuses and bread. That's what they're going to offer. Verse 9. It's a good place to get a drink. Somebody say amen. Amen. The kings of the earth, verse 9, who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her, will weep and lament for her when they see smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. You see, in 1 hour, which just speaks to the how quickly and how definite that this and specific is this judgment going to come, where Babylon says, I'm not going to see any sorrow, as nothing's going to happen to me. And she sits in her wealth and her beauty and in all of her power and authority and her money, and says, what could happen? And God says, I'm going to happen. In 1 hour, I will bring it all crashing down. And even men, we could go, 1 hour? How is that going to happen? 1 hour? Stay tuned. And all the kings of the earth, so this is the first group of people again, this kings of the earth, that they have committed fornication, joined to her in porneia, and they've lived luxurious. Not the kings representing the nations, not the kings doing it for the nations. This is simply the politicians getting filthy, stinking rich, partnering with Babylon, right? Right on the backs. But they'll give you bread and circus. I'm going to get kicked off of YouTube bigger. And they're going to see the smoke of her burning and standing at a distance for fear of torment. They've joined together with Babylon. They have made themselves rich in the presence of Babylon, enjoyed all of this life with Babylon, thinking that it was all going to be going on forever this way. And now they find themselves standing at a distance going, alas, alas, which is like, whoa, whoa, the great city's fallen. What am I going to do? How is life going to go on? But they don't run to the city. They're not joined to that much. They were just there for the money, just there for the wealth, there for the greed, there for the benefits, for the fruit of their own soul that they sought. This is what, but they would never run because they don't really want to get sucked into the torment. They don't want to get pulled into suffering the same thing that Babylon has suffered. So they're going to weep and they're going to mourn from a distance. Verse 11, and the merchants, the second group of people that are really affected like this, the merchants of the earth, they're going to weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple, silk, scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and the cinnamon, incense, fragrant oil, and frankincense, wine, and oil, fine flour, and wheat, cattle, sheep, and horses, and chariots, and bodies, and the souls of men. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you. And all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you. You shall find them no more at all. the merchants of these things, which became rich by her, will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, the great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. The merchants found themselves suddenly in a terrible place, weeping and lamenting, mourning because nobody buys their merchandise anymore. It's because the prices were too stinking high. Everything is ridiculous. Babylon is the marketplace. It's where Amazon and Walmart shop. I threw that part in. That's not in the Bible. But you read all of this is all the different categories. You know, it's beautiful jewelry, right? It's beautiful clothing. It's then building materials, cinnamon, fragrance, incense. This is like perfume and things like that. And then oil and fine flour and wheat would be food and some cattle and sheep and horses. And then it gets to the bodies and the souls of men. It makes you a little nervous, doesn't it? The bodies and the souls of men. And it, you know, in those days, there was a market. There was a slave market. There was this buying and selling of people. And that was part of the culture. And we think, well, I'm glad that's not happening anymore, right? Except there's a great uprising in this. Well, it kind of coincides with the other uprising that we see of this sort of Roman-like culture. This trafficking of people makes us nervous, and frankly, most of us are okay as long as we don't have to look at it or think about it to our shame. Babylon was a godless commerce, a marketplace apart from God. A marketplace offering the fruit that a godless soul longs for. The fruit that a godless soul longs for. Well, let me tell you what the marketplace of trafficking in human souls looks like today. Just real quick. Pornography. $3.3 billion with a B dollar industry. That's probably underestimated. That's probably old numbers. But they hope to add another billion by using virtual reality. They're really getting to market this virtual reality. You can add another billion to their 3.3 billion. Every day there are 68 million searches for porn. That's 30,000 people watching a second. This is in America. Spending $3,000 per second. And 30% of all websites are pornographic. 1 in 5 mobile searches are for porn. 100,000 of these websites deal in child porn. 1 in 5 youth pastors uses pornography. 1 in 7 senior pastors regularly views porn. That's 50,000 church leaders using pornography in America. This is a scourge on our society. This is a blight. And it should not be in a church. It's an ugly sin. It's one of those ugly sins that people think that it's just personal, it's just private. I can do it in the privacy of my own home. Where it's quiet, and it won't hurt anything. Nobody's hurting anything. You're lying to yourself. It consumes your mind. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you engage your family, male or female. And if you think you're reading these romance novels, about half of them are pornographic. It's like clean porn, I guess. The ladies go, what's not porn? It's porn. A lot of it is very porn. You're submitting your mind to something that is going to change the way you think. And all of the averages and all the statistics say it's happening right here. And you got to stop it. There's lots of help out there. There's lots of people to help you. I can help you, can show you things and help you through it. Don't allow this to go on. Human trafficking. Human trafficking is the sexual exploitation, forced labor, forced begging, forced marriage, much more. Children are sold as sex slaves, child soldiers. Adults are trafficked for organ harvesting. One of the rising markets, they say, is occult sacrifices. The trafficking in human souls and selling them in these places where they are used in occult ceremonies and sacrifices. 30% of human trafficking is children. Women are involved in 49% of it. 63% of all the human trafficking is about sex. Now tell me that that's not related to the whole pornographic industry where our mind is so set on and so sexualized by everything in our society that it's just driven by it all the time. There was an arrest in Knoxville just the day before yesterday, I think. Human trafficking. Men pursuing underage girls. It's happening all around you. It's happening right here in Sweetwater. It's happening everywhere. About abortion. Fiercely defended as a right, and a total disregard for the rights of any child unborn. Fiercely defended as health care when it has nothing to do with health care. It has everything to do with the $80 million brings in. That's a small number. Again, it's probably old, and regardless of the dollars, it's killing unborn babies. All the evidence is that the world will revert back to one world religion, determined to have its Tower of Babel. And it certainly seems like this marketplace of Babylon is really driven and has a huge undertow of all of this wickedness in these marketplaces and marketing the human soul. The Siren song of Babylon, drawing others into the shipwreck of their faith, to the godless cliffs. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, verse 17, every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance, and they cried out when they saw the smoke of the burning, saying, "What is this great city?" What is like this great city? This is the marketplace. Marketing everything. And there's nothing wrong with marketing in general, but it's the heart and the attitude that is marketing apart from God, everything about godlessness. Isn't it fascinating that when the oil refinery got hacked, and all of a sudden panic is like, the oil refineries have fallen, I like you hear that in the backdrop. Babylon has fallen. And then the beef industry, right? All of a sudden they get hacked, and it's like the beef industry has fallen. Bitcoin has fallen. The internet has fallen. Man, you go, what could bring everything to its knees? It's like just flip the switch on the internet. I don't know. It's crazy. Well, the merchants, the ship masters, are going to look in the distance. And the shipmasters, verse 19, they threw dust on their heads. It's just a picture of mourning. And they cried out, weeping and wailing. And for the third time we hear, alas, alas, that great city. Great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by their wealth. For in 1 hour, third time we hear, in 1 hour she is made desolate. It all came crashing down in 1 hour. They're all in awe, amazed, watching from a distance. They don't want to get too close because they don't want to share in the plagues and in the weeping and the wailing and in the persecution and the judgment that is coming against, not persecution, but judgment that is coming against Babylon. They don't want a part of that. They don't want part of the wrath that is falling on Babylon. They just wanted to be along for the ride for the great wealth. Is Babylon about money? Well, it seems to be a big part of it. Babylon in our culture, it's like the oil that lubricates the whole thing is money. But I always look back to that tower. It says we want to make a name for ourselves apart from God. Verse 20, there's a call to rejoice over her, O heaven. You holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Man, I got to hurry. It's getting late, sorry. I got to finish, though. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone. A millstone could be a little small stone, be a stationary stone, and it had a stone on the top, and that would be grind grain. But this is talking about the big stone, the big base millstone. This thing could weigh a few thousand pounds. And then there was a top thinner stone that would ride on top of it, and they would grind their grain. If you've ever seen the one that Hollywood has one, it's pretty cool. This is what they're talking about, this great millstone. The mighty angel took up this great millstone. He must have been a mighty angel to pick this up. And he threw it into the sea, saying that thus with violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down and shall not be found any more. And the sound of harpists, musicians, and flutists and trumpeters shall not be heard in you anymore. No craftsman or any craft shall be found in you anymore. And the sound of the millstone shall not be heard in you anymore. The light of the lamp shall not shine in you anymore. The voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall not be heard in you anymore. For your merchants were great men of the earth, and for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and the saints, and all who were slain on the earth. And so this picture of taking this great millstone and casting it into the sea and took up this stone like this great millstone, threw it into the sea, and said, this is the way Babylon would be cast down, just like thrown down into the sea. And it is, again, language is found in Jeremiah 51, if you want to look it up, 51 verse 64, that Jeremiah had prophesied to Sariah, and he was on his way with Zedekiah, the king of Israel, on the way to captivity in Babylon. Jeremiah says, when you get there, you got to speak to the people and you got to tell them that there's a day coming when judgment is going to come on the city of Babylon, and that it is going to be thrown down. And so you take the scroll and you read this scroll and you talk about Babylon has fallen, and Babylon will be judged. And you take the scroll and you tie it to a millstone and you cast it into the sea, and it would sink to the bottom. That's what's going to happen to Babylon. And so John's grabbing this same language that Jeremiah used to say it's going to be just like that with this Babylon. And he's speaking of this, what appeared to sort of have a facade, had a faceplate of Rome, a mask of Rome over this same old Babylon that we've known, and I think that we will see again. And so this great millstone is going to be thrown down, and all the normalcy, which we got a little taste of that last year, haven't we? what we all considered normal just all went away, right? It's all gone. And there for a long time we were holding our breath waiting for normal to return, and then suddenly we realized that there is no normal. This is normal. I hate the term new normal. That's annoying. This is just the normal of what life was going to be. And there's not the sound of musicians or craftsmen and the sound of the millstone, the light of the lamp. See the beautiful picture of the city, lanterns, and hearing the bride and the bridegroom, hearing an orchestra play, hearing music play, all of those normal things that would have been very normal in Babylon, all that would be taken away. He said the merchants were great men, which I find is interesting because it's so much like the phrase, speaking of Nimrod, the mighty man, the mighty hunter, the founder of Babylon. For your sorcery, by your sorcery, all the nations were deceived. The word sorcery there is that word pharmakia. This kind of sounds like this idea of what we get pharmacy and drug use, and it's the idea of using magic and dark arts and a magic spell. And it's as if Babylon had to cast a spell on all of the world. The Babylon had cast a spell on all the kings and all the nations. That Babylon had cast a spell in all of the merchants. And that all people were deceived, and so many people were deceived by this spell that was on them. And it makes me wonder when I read this, are we deceived by this spell? Are we deceived? Because in her was found the blood of the prophets and the saints and all who were slain on the earth. That she had deceived so many. Well, who killed those prophets and saints? Many of it was the very religious people of Israel. It becomes a whole nother discussion, but it's fascinating. Are we deceived by this spell that's cast on the culture? Where we think we've somehow deserved affluency, that we somehow deserve all the great things and all the many blessings that somehow God's going to take care of us because He don't want us to do without all our blessings because we have like a right to those now, right? I mean, is that what we're thinking? Is that where we're at? Do we come back and understand and realize that we don't deserve any of this? We don't deserve anything. All we deserve is eternal punishment. I picture this. Those that are deceived look very much like that rich young ruler that we talked about. Where the Bible says we are to be poor in spirit, that we are to die to ourselves, that we are to be slaves of Jesus Christ. The rich young ruler wanted to be filthy, stinking rich and needed more. He wanted to hold on his youth. He wanted eternity because he didn't want to die. And he wanted to lose his wealth, and he certainly didn't want to lose his position, his power, and authority. He wanted to be a rich young ruler, and there's a rich young ruler in every one of us. Where instead of being a rich young ruler, the Lord called him to be poor in spirit, dead to self, submitted to Him as a slave, bought and paid for by His blood. Let's bow our heads.